Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with our weekly P&Q&C&A&T videos. This is season 6, episode 42. P&Q&C&A&T is a lot of letters. The important ones are Q and A and P. And P is important because if you're currently watching this on YouTube, you can access this on all major podcasting platforms by checking out the links in the description. And Q&A is important because it's mostly questions and answers, and sometimes it is comments, and sometimes it is talking. Getting into the first question, this one comes from Snipes, and we should note here that every word is capitalized like it's the title of a book, except more than like the title of a book, because words like or and a are also capitalized. So
oh, that's true. I hadn't noticed that.
Maybe it's stylized in some way.
Yeah.
But the question reads as follows. This isn't a troll question, but are you guys gay, or are you just roommates, or something? And it is not door number 1, it is not door number 2. It falls solidly into the or something category.
All right, so there's a couple things. I mean, not necessarily treated as a question, but as a takeoff point. There's a couple things. One is the value between an open-ended or closed-ended question. Yeah. So a lot of times when you actually want to know something, and instead of asking what you want to know, which would be broader and gives more latitude to the person who's answering.
What is the general nature of your relationship?
I think that's sort of what they're getting at, right?
Yeah.
And they're taking a few stabs at it.
Even
and
the question, are you guys gay, is not really a full answer, because I could be gay, or you could be gay, or we could both be gay. And that, even what he's suggesting is 2 layers abstracted from what he wants to know, or what they want to know, I should say.
Right. Well, Sly is sort of a guy's name, but yeah, you're right, totally.
But Sly Snipe sounds like an alliteration. It's probably not a real name, or it might not be a real name. I shouldn't make that assumption, because, you know, the question is, are we in a romantic relationship, is probably what are you guys gay means, right? It's like gay for each other, right?
Yeah, so that's the other takeoff point. It's funny to me, and I'm old enough to have seen this, really. Like, well, maybe I don't even need to be that old. It wasn't that long ago that when you were asking if somebody was gay or implied that they were gay, that was meant as an insult.
Yeah.
And that it was somehow bad. And I think, I mean, I'm sure there's still recesses of the internet where that's going to be taken for granted, but it feels like, I mean, we're making some sort of progress, right? Yeah. Where people in the margins are being pulled a little bit into the center. Is that the right way to say it?
I think one of the other things, and maybe into the spotlight more, people are more aware of them and the issues. I think one of the other things too is that's really hard is that, you know, in gaming and gaming related spaces, we probably are a little bit further back than a lot of other places, right?
Further back, you mean like away from sort of mainstream?
Away from more socially acceptable ways of behavior and ways of being, right? Because I think
socially acceptable, or just the more common ones. You know, I think. Are you saying we're in a more progressive space?
Less progressive, I think, in gaming.
We
generally,
are?
Not we specifically, but I'm saying gaming as a whole.
Oh, see, I was thinking it more along the lines of you within the gaming space. And I thought that doesn't make sense.
Oh, no.
I feel like that within the gaming space we're maybe a little bit more progressive, but as I totally agree with you as far as the internet, gaming tends to be less progressive.
Yeah. So it's harder. I mean, you have your exceptions to that. There's one really good account in sort of parody things. There's this dude named Ace Watkins, and he works for a satire gaming site called Hard Drive, I think.
Okay.
And he has a fake, like, Ace Watkins is running for 2020 president as the first gamer president, and he's got a bunch of really incredible quotes, like, people have asked him, he's like, people have asked me about, like, using transgender people's pronouns, and I say that if you can remember all the obscure lore in World of Warcraft, you can remember people's canonical pronouns, and stuff like that. So, you know, he's very progressive about it, and there's a video that I watched where he went to Comic-Con, and he's like, who's better to, you know, control the military than somebody who is, you know, fought on the ground level over and over again? Who's better to do whatever than this? And then who's better to handle race relations? Okay, well, maybe gamers aren't the best for handling race relations, but I will find somebody who is. So it sort of reminds me of that, right? in general, I think if we were in other spaces, people probably would not preface it the same way, but doing stuff gaming related content, it definitely makes it more likely.
Actually, you know what? And I sort of, when I saw this question and I was thinking about this particular video that we're doing right now, I'd actually thought, okay, we're not going to answer it, but maybe we could do a bit of self-promotion. In our podcast, episode 0, we actually talk about this.
Yeah, 0.5. We have an hour worth of content, which is only on our podcast stream, which we did as sort of a bonus content thing to have people jump over and listen to it if they wanted. And it was pretty good.
Yeah, and I'm still not even sure why we did it, because we make no ad revenue off our podcast.
It's very navel-gazy, too, because we mostly just talk about ourselves. I don't think we answer any questions in it.
That's true.
It's just for people who are interested in context about us.
It's a promotion of the podcast.
We pretty much figured that people who followed it to the actual podcast platform like hearing us ramble about random stuff and maybe don't care as much about Injustice, and it's for those people. And if that sounds like you, then it's worth listening to. And if that doesn't sound like you, then don't listen.
That brings us right to our next question.
There we go. Okay, our next question comes from Disturbed Toenails, and they say, "Waste of my time. You talk so much." And I mean,
I think they wandered off into the wrong channel.
I think it's interesting because definitely, I mean, we're to talk about ourselves again. Stuff like this used to bother me more, and then I think we figured out the stuff we wanted to do and figured out that we sort of like doing it for us.
Yeah,
and then it bothered me less.
I mean, it almost has to be, right? Like it's funny how perspective is everything. That there are people who look at our channel, see the number of subscribers, which is not a lot, but somehow see that as success.
Yeah.
And they think this is what it means to be successful on YouTube, and either want to get their digs in, or they respect us for what we do.
Yeah.
Is there a third? I don't
know.
Yeah, I don't know either. It's just, and then it leaves us, I mean, the more, what I found funny is that right now we're sort of in a lull. We're not near the top. We're right near sort of bottomed out in terms of number of views and ad revenue and engagement and stuff.
And I'm more than happy with it.
Yeah, but we get a lot less of these kind of comments. Like when we're actually getting more views, the comments are actually worse.
Yeah, I think for all of the fact that our channel is slowing down from the original metrics, I find that I'm much happier with a channel that is slowly dying than I thought it would be. You know?
Yeah.
I have no real issues. I think this is a good space, and I think the comments that we get, I love sort of the fact that I can recognize people and see them come back, and people have thoughtful things to say.
Yeah.
And, or even just people who ask a lot of questions and continue to be curious and obviously watch and engage, right? All that stuff is just really cool to me. And it's so much easier to see that stuff when that is a higher percentage of the comments.
Right. I think, and maybe the thing to be taken away from this is that in my mind, I'm bouncing around from the YouTube channel to marks at school to financial success, whatever, however you measure your success. If you're already there is different than if you're chasing it. And if you're chasing it, the danger is you become a bit of a slave to the pursuit than you are to sort of the underlying importance. So let me explain. When you're in school, the idea is that you want to learn. Mm-hmm. If you want to go further, like graduate school or professional school afterwards, you need marks to reflect that. But the marks are meant to represent mastery of the subject.
Yeah, but they totally don't.
But they totally don't. Right, yeah, exactly. So it has to do with partial mastery and partial test taking and mark getting skill.
Yeah.
So when the danger of, say, with a YouTube channel, if you feel like, okay, that you're on your way to YouTube success, to be able to make a living at YouTube, whatever. I mean, we're so far away from that, it's not even funny.
Yeah.
But if we felt like we were using this to pursue that, then it'd be very easy to become beholden to what you believe is the path to success, which might be giving the more vocal commenters what they actually want.
Yeah.
Which I think is a mistake because, well, for us it's a mistake, but for a lot of people, because most people don't become successful, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think the great
majority of people,
right?
Yeah.
And so the key really is figuring out what you want to do, go ahead and do it, and if you get joy out of it,
yeah,
every other metric becomes secondary, and it's still worthwhile doing because you enjoy it, and not because you get however many number of views. Oh, another analogy would
epiphany
be,
happen.
yeah, no, but it's just the connection to that, right? Like, there's people who are, say, desperate to be in a relationship,
Yeah.
and they're so desperate that they just don't even care about who they are. They've picked somebody.
They do it for the wrong reasons, yeah.
And they try to be a different person. Like, they try to become the person that their target wants at their own expense, and that's not a path to happiness, because then you're sort of subsuming yourself.
Yeah.
And always working for what?
Yeah, there's a lot of patterns like that in social relationships. This is a little bit like, and by a little bit I mean totally off topic, but one thing that I've seen a lot at university, and I go to a university that is pretty academics focused, so there is, I think, a pretty decent subset of people who go to my university who really struggle with the social element of it.
Okay.
And it's probably harder than, I'd say, a lot of other universities to make sort of friends, make meaningful connections.
Why do you think that?
Just because there's so many people who focus on school. It's a commuter school too.
So
there's a lot of people who go to school, go to class, go home after class, and I also think that because multiple people have told me that.
Oh, and I, that was my experience in school.
Yeah, and so making meaningful social connections is a lot more challenging.
Right.
And there is definitely a type of person that you see who doesn't have a lot of social connections. When they meet somebody that they get along with pretty well, it is really important to them to get along with that person. And when you have to try really hard and force it, especially when you feel like you don't have a lot of people to talk to, and you bring somebody in new and you like them and you just want to talk to them all the time, right? It's sort of a self-defeating,
self-defeating, right?
Sort of set of actions where if you push really, really hard, right? If you want to hang out all the time with this person, right? When somebody you just met, you really want to throw yourself into it.
You make them uncomfortable.
You end up running into some potential issues with that.
Right.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, the people that I've met have by and large been really good about it, even when they've been like, I've had really trouble socializing. But I know like a lot of people that I know have had people like come on too strong in that way, and they've had issues. So I've mostly been pretty lucky with that. I don't think anybody's really pushed me.
Well, and I think it makes a huge difference when you live in residence, right?
Yeah.
Like, even if you don't stay there, but just having that experience where you're not part of the commuting.
Yeah.
I mean, it was interesting because back, this is few years ago, but when I was in school, I commuted, and I spent a big part of the beginning of school just going to school, taking the classes, and doing the exams and whatever, and just going home.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the saving grace was probably being in a specialist program for chemistry, and I can't remember what. And at the time, I think they let you do like a double specialist, and I think it was chemistry or a specialist in a major. It was so long.
They let you do a lot.
They let you do a lot. I didn't end up sticking with it, so that's why I sort of don't have a great memory of it. But the classes were small enough so that we had maybe less than 20 people in the chemistry class, because it was there was a biochemistry class. It was meant for just the specialists, so nobody else wanted to do it. And we actually had the head of the department lecturing us, which sounds better than it was, because it strikes me now that he probably was a bit of a lush and showed up to the lectures, half cut or fully cut a lot of times. But he's really friendly and available after classes to help support the people who were taking the course. It's just, it's just interesting, like how much a shift going from high school to university is.
Yeah.
And how some of the skills aren't so applicable, and clearly the environment is just so different, and it doesn't lend itself to learning that.
Yeah, there's a lot of, when people say like they won't be as forgiving in university, it is so professor dependent. I think the difference is in high school there's more external pressure on them to be a certain amount of forgiving, right? To give you a certain amount of leeway. And it feels like a much more personal experience, right? And when you step into university, you have courses where you have massive classes where they're just going to be like, no way. And then you have classes where people really follow up and are putting in work, and especially because people are passionate about it. I have a research methods in psychology class, And my professor is so obviously very passionate about stuff, so she'll do in-class activities where you'll answer clickers, like you'll use like iClickers to answer questions, and then there's an online lecture component where you answer online surveys, and she will make fake articles for future classes with the results from our class, so that she can use like real correlation coefficients and error analysis and stuff for like, so people like, it'll be a survey question about like how you study, and then she'll bring it in later as an example. She's like, these are the results from the data of your class, and she made like, for us to review it, she made like a fake journal article using the journal article framework stripped down, so it was much more simple than what you would normally read using her data.
So all right, so that's cool. What she's doing, she's making the topic come alive.
Yeah,
because she's using it with data that you're connected to, so it makes it real.
Well, it's data that we are, if we are in the online section. So, you know, she obviously very much cares about it. I've heard mixed reviews of her. I personally like her. One of my friends does not enjoy the class. But, you know, you can, for someone like her, when we did our midterm, right, she was like, okay, so what I get is I get data based off of each question and showing the sort of, she talks about like the different validities, right? And the discriminant validity of whether or not, if there's a question that a lot of people get wrong, whether or not it discriminates between the people who studied and the people who didn't.
Oh.
So when people get it wrong, if that's everybody getting it wrong at the same rate, or if it is the people who are getting it right, if it's a small subset, are the people who are also getting everything else right.
Right. Okay. So...
And she tries to remove questions if they're seemingly stumping everybody and not just stumping the people who haven't studied.
So, all right. So I had an experience working with a professional college, going over their licensing exam. And this was one of the things they actually talked about. And what you just said sort of illuminates it more. That we would look at two different things. We would look at both how well people did on the exam, if it was... this one exam question was consistent with the rest of the exam questions. Yeah. But the second part was exactly what you said. For the people who, good was it at discriminating, where it would sort out the people, but sort them out in a way where the ones that did poorly on it did poorly overall, and the ones that did well would do well overall too, because that still makes it a really good question. Even if the average mark is low, if it was very discriminating, and it was a good predictor for how they would do on the rest of the exam. Yeah. Then it was a really good question.
Yeah, because I think that's one of the things that you learn in university is because the marks are so low, and because in most classes, especially when they have bigger classes, they want the average to be pretty consistent. They want it to be like high 60s, basically. Right. You just need to do better than other people, and because they don't have the same expectation. Like some in big classes, a lot of times they'll give you bonus marks, or they'll take off questions when it's unfair, and like if marks drop below 60 generally, that's when they start going, oh, what have we done wrong, what do we need to adjust, right? And so I had a class where I got a mark that I would have been okay with but not super happy with, and then it got adjusted, like everybody's mark got bumped up like 8%. Because the test was really hard, and the average, to bring the average up to where it should be for a class of that size. And they can actually do that because the class was like, I think, like 500 people or something. So they had enough data that it wasn't just, we were a lazy year, right?
Okay. So what you said about that when you mentioned you don't have to do great, you just have to do well relative to somebody else. It's like that joke where when you're in a group and you're getting chased by a lion, you don't have to be the fastest guy. You just don't have to be the second slowest. Yeah, you just have to not be the slowest. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So, yeah, for sure. It's an interesting thing because there are definitely a lot of people in undergrad, for example, who are digging for a professional school, whether it's medicine or law or something.
Oh man, in a lot of my first year courses, I'm in a life science program. They asked how many of you want to go to med school, and like 2/3 of the class raised their hand.
Yeah, and that's a lot of them, once they realize that
it's like a 700-seat classroom too.
Yeah, if their marks aren't good enough, then they eventually do change their
a lot of people end up changing path before the end of the 4 years for sure. Yeah.
So, wow, what was the original question? Sorry.
Oh, we've gotten waste of my time. You talk so much was the original question, which we have really made good on here.
Yeah, it's
But I think for professors, right? There's sort of, you can tell when people really like their stuff. And like I said, I had mixed reviews of the prof that I've been talking about, but you can tell she was really passionate about it. And I don't think she's a great teacher, but I think she is trying and is a good enough teacher. And the passion definitely helps. And I've had teachers who are really passionate who sort of suck about what they're teaching, or who are seemingly passionate enough, right? And then I've had teachers who are really passionate, and luckily it's mostly been these professors who are passionate about what they're teaching and great at it. I have a professor right now who is absolutely great. My cognitive neuroscience professor is excited, engaging, informative when he talks about topics and makes them pretty clear when he goes over stuff, and it's a treat to be in his classes.
See, this is it. I mean, don't we want everybody who's doing something to really enjoy? Maybe this will lead to a later point that we're going to make after the questions are over, but I feel like we need to have more opportunities where people get to do what they really enjoy, especially in a world where there's going to be so much automation that you just can't have people fully employed in jobs that are good enough to make a living from.
I think one thing, other than past giving people opportunity, because that's the obvious one, which we probably need to consider, which I think would go hand in hand. I think if people had the opportunity to do whatever they enjoyed more fully, it would obviously help this a lot. But even people have the opportunity. I had the opportunity to do a lot of different things, right? I needed to get a job that would, or I needed to do something that would be able to theoretically get me a job, right? Have a good chance of being able to support me, right? I couldn't pursue, like, I don't know, feng shui, right? Although, honestly, I probably could. That actually would be a career, I guess, like, sort of...
There might be demand for it.
Yeah, rock arrangement. I'm trying to figure out something that there's no way I could get, I could make money. But I did have a lot of opportunity, but what I probably didn't have as much of as I could have is time to figure out what that thing would be, right? I think even people, like my cognitive neuroscience prof, is very lucky to have found something that he obviously really enjoys, because he talks about it super excitedly, right? But I think there would have been a good chance that if he just wasn't exposed to something like that, right, in the time that he spent in school and then doing stuff after school, right? Or, he might not have put himself down that path.
Right, there's just so many possibilities. The fact that you end up in that one particular place, I think, has a lot to do with circumstances beyond your control that narrow the opportunities into this one particular thing that happened to be where you ended up.
So I think even when you have the resources for it, you run the very real risk of not finding the thing and sort of running down the timer, as it were, on picking. Right?
Right. And sometimes it's not even that. Like, it's just the fact that your life is just... fill in the blank, right? Whatever adjective you want to put in. Yeah. And it limits you into what you see. And some people thrive in that, and some people are just unlucky, and it's not something that clicks for them.
Yeah, and obviously that's a very, first world problem, right? To have opportunity but not time to explore all of them, because you never have time to explore all of them. Sure. It's just there's sort of a secondary layer even past the sort of initial barrier to entry that is, I think, worth considering in some context too. Obviously, that comes later, right? We remove the barriers to entry first, and then we figure out what the problems are from the sort of new plateau, right?
Right. And so that maybe brings me back to something else you said earlier about how your stats prof clearly loves what she does. Yeah. And is doing things in a way to make it more real and come alive. Yeah. So
making a very real effort.
At Scintillation, the convention in Montreal we went to, there was a panel about a class that was done at University of Chicago, run by a writer who's also a history professor,
Ada Palmer,
and it was a reenactment. Basically,
I think the papal election of 1492.
It was 1400 something. I trust your memory of the number better than I do.
It's 14 something. Yeah, I believe it was 1492.
Okay, and it's basically a whole what do you call it? When people do there's
RPG.
Yeah, about real life. There's a thing for that.
It's not quite a LARP, which is live action. Well, it
is basically LARP.
It is basically, but without the stigma.
Yeah, but the LARPing is a lot of it is mental. It's not like you're running around with weapons. Because
it's sort of it's like a more in-depth TRPG, which is a tabletop RPG, than it is a LARP. Because I think LARPs have their own sort of very specific niche, and it's maybe I balk at calling this a LARP because this sounded cool.
It was amazing. And I think, I mean, when I was young, I hated history. I thought the history teachers I had were just not very, well, maybe they were good. They just weren't good for me.
Yeah, and I've also never enjoyed history. I had a good history teacher in high school, like somebody who made it, I think, pretty much close to as good as it could have been for me, and history was just not my thing.
So who could have known when you're going to science fiction fantasy convention that somehow a panel on a historical event reenactment would be one of the highlights, and there were people who had been involved in it, a couple students, and Ada Palmer, and I think more than a couple of people who'd done the support work to help the students really get into it, like writing them letters as different historical figures. And it was brilliant.
Yeah, there was, I think, a really fascinating discussion about how using systems effectively can bring certain concepts to the forefront and make them really real. Like, one of the things they talked about was it was supposed to be a very sort of, what's the term when corrupt. It was a very corrupt time. Right? In the world. And so the papal election, the bribery that was going on was rampant, and they were dealing with massive sums of money and titles and trading lots of power. And so there was the level of people who were really important, and then there was a second level of like advisors and things who were making almost no money, and the amount of cash that was changing hands in a totally cavalier, no consideration way was like tens or hundreds of times more than the like monthly salaries of the people who were operating at the level of assistants, right? And how having just a really simple system where somebody was making like one, whatever the unit was, I don't even remember, of currency a month, where people were bartering with 200, 300, of that same unit of currency, and it puts it into really stark focus, where they were talking about one circumstance where somebody was in charge of sort of the paychecks for the advisors, and accidentally wrote down a number wrong and gave somebody a raise from 3 to 5. And then that person was, loyal to them for the rest of the game, did everything in their power to help that one person, and ended up changing things on a really large scale. And obviously you talk about it like a game, which makes it feel really abstract, but the systems, the way that it sounded like it was designed, sounded so thorough and elegant, and just like really like it did a really, really good job of doing good simulation of alternate history that was living and flexible.
So if we want to try to bring this back around to something sort of more generalizable, I think the lesson to be learned is when you go to a convention, when you go to any kind of fandom convention, that while the topics might be important in picking which panels you go to, it's probably just as important the panelists and having an idea of how they usually are to decide what's probably going to knock your socks off.
Yeah, there were some people that any panel that they were on, I'm sure, I was 100% sure it would be interesting no matter what the topic was. Gretchen McCulloch, the linguist, because internet was fascinating on anything that she talked on, and I found Ada Palmer captivating whatever panel she was on. It was really cool to listen to her. Just always had something fascinating to say. And there was tons of other people too, but I think if I had to pick two standout people, like every time they said something, pretty much I was like, wow, that is cool.
Okay, so, and unfortunately for a lot of unrelated reasons, I mean, I ended up missing a bunch of panels that I meant to go to. The other person from the first year that was really interesting was Maria Farrell. That especially like the ideas about good and evil and what direction our future is headed into. And it's just too bad, just because, again, so much stuff going on. There were 2 tracks. There was, you have to find time to eat. It was, anyways, I'm just so looking forward to next year. And what's cool is next year it's not going to be Thanksgiving weekend.
We have talked so much about ourselves and our experiences this episode.
All right, so we got questions.
We've got some questions. We should move on. We've got something. We've got questions, and we've got injustice related questions. So this one comes from Damian Wayne, and they say, "What was the reason Red Lantern, and then in brackets Hal Jordan, nerfed? Was he too OP? And then we had a couple comments down in the thread that Blaze Within saying there used to be a way where he can infinitely heal and never really go down in survival mode.
So let me just address like the actual concrete information objective stuff. That he couldn't heal. That's part of his passive, that he uses his health to do specials. He's not healable. However, there was a way that if you teamed him up with John Stewart Green Lantern,
yeah,
because we've said this a bunch of times before, real time is not the same as game time. And the invulnerability that you could get out of John Stewart for Red Lantern, during that time, you could do basically unlimited numbers of supers.
Yeah, because it would use like no
time.
In-game time, yeah.
Yeah, and you could just do it over and over and over again. I mean, if you made a mistake, like if you pause even like a fraction of a second, you would screw yourself up and you lose it. But he was ridiculously
You basically
powerful.
just tap on the same part in the screen over and over, like as soon as you got to like the back like quarter of his special.
Yeah.
Just so you wouldn't accidentally lose it.
And I'm usually a little hesitant to talk about like guessing at what people think when they do things.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of the pattern that the developers have used to decide when they're gonna nerf somebody or when they're not, it feels like that characters that in the context at the time when they do the nerfing,
yeah,
is either incorrectly powerful or too powerful or maybe a combination of both. Because Red Lantern Hal Jordan had a listed damage for Special 2.
Yeah.
And we documented that the amount of damage was actually way more than it was supposed to be.
Yeah, so that, in that case, that nerf is fixing him to what he should be.
But then they reduced it to less than that.
Yeah.
So less than the posted amount. So that was the first thing. The second thing was that it seemed, whether accurately or not, it seemed like he was really like way too powerful compared to others, because offensively,
yeah,
you could get through the game really easily in multiplayer and really fast and just totally dominate offensively.
And I think the difference is for a lot of other characters like Ares or Batgirl, when you give them the ability to mow through guys, it is a specific combination. You're loading them out in a specific way. I think Hal Jordan was the closest to somebody who was broken in his own right without anything else.
Yeah. Now the problem I see though is that it was better than some of the other things that they nerfed. So for example, Arkham Origins Deathstroke. It's not so much that they nerfed it, but when they first had him in multiplayer, pretty much, if you faced him in defense, he would hit 200% every single time with his special 1, which meant it was unblockable and it was crit damage, and you would basically get wasted if you faced Arkham Origins Deathstroke. So Red Lantern Hal Jordan did not need to be fixed, at least if we go for the sort of overarching idea that as long as people don't get frustrated when they play, things are okay. So he's great on offense. He wasn't that great on defense.
Yeah, he was sort of crap on defense.
Right, because
you just block.
Yeah.
And then he would die.
The AI would not use him optimally. So I think there was probably... he shouldn't have been nerfed.
Yeah.
It's not like it was... Not as much as he was, where now you have to wait for his power to regenerate after you use it. Before, you could just use it immediately.
Yeah.
It seemed only right, because if it's using his health, there's no reason his power should actually go down.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I miss Red Lantern Hal Jordan way more than I miss Antimatter Sinestro, even though Antimatter Sinestro's, with using the League of Assassins gear, was maybe more powerful. It was easier to exploit.
Yeah, there wasn't as much oomph though, because it took longer.
And what they were doing with that was correcting the League of Assassins gear to perform the way it was actually described in the gear instead of how it was actually working.
Yeah.
So,
which is hard to fault them for.
It is. If that's the end of our question, can I wouldn't mind talking a little bit about something that we did on a previous episode.
Sure.
To just clarify some of the ideas. Because you know how a couple of times now I've talked about how the idea of raising minimum wage is a good thing, because if the job is doesn't produce a living wage if you work full time, there's a problem with that. And I think it's easy and a bit facile to say that without maybe touching on some of the underlying assumptions that go into it. And the one thing I want to point out is that just because someone is desperate enough to do something doesn't really make you any less of an a-hole if you're willing to exploit that. Because the biggest argument against raising minimum wages, well, if somebody's willing to do it, that's their free choice. If they don't want to do it, they can just go get another job.
Yeah, that's one of the things. I think one place that you see the sort of the idea of exploitation and somebody being willing to do it doesn't make it okay to have them do it.
Right.
And this is not a place where you just see it in that respect, but where it is an argument in a really multifaceted issue is sex work, right?
Yes.
Because, like, you know, I don't think this is a particularly controversial opinion anymore. I have no issue with sex work inherently. Right? I think it's, you know, labor, and it works for some people, and if it works for your lifestyle, there's no sort of moral judgment on it, right? It is just a I think it is a choice that you should be able to make in a democratic society.
Except
and this is what the issue that you run into, which is that a lot of the legislation that ends up hurting sex workers who are doing things consensually and positively is people coming at it from the perspective of exploitation, which is, I know, a massive problem.
Right, because you don't want people to be exploited. You don't want people so desperate for it that this is what they're willing to do something that they consider wrong.
Yeah.
Or that is, I don't know, harmful to them. Because they're so desperate to survive.
And because there are so many layers to it. There are people who are, there's literal, like, crimes, right? When people are being trafficked, right? When it is totally non-consensual, right? And then there is the coercive consent aspect of basically sex work under capitalism. Not to get too, like, socialist on everybody, right?
Okay.
But,
all right, so
where the money is, and the need for money is a way of coercing consent where no party directly is actually doing it, right? But you end up doing with people doing things that they're uncomfortable with to survive.
So you mentioned socialism versus capitalism. I need to say this. I promise we will get back on track. How is it that the lack of power in Venezuela is an indictment of socialism and somehow proof that socialism fails completely, whereas wildfires and power outages in California is not an indictment of capitalism because that company spent all their money giving dividends to their shareholders instead of repairing infrastructure? Anyways, all right, so sorry, that socialism versus capitalism. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, so I think you end up running into that issue with, I think, jobs where people have the opportunity to be exploited, right? For their labor, and I think that's the problem. Is no matter what you do to the minimum wage, right? You need to remove people's, you need to remove economic coercion as a factor to be sure that whatever you're left with, like whatever jobs people are doing are jobs that they want to be doing or are. Or would be in other circumstances willing to do.
Right. So I think that's why there's two ideas that both potentially achieve the same goal, but they're coming at it from different ways. So you've got universal basic income, or UBI, versus a livable minimum wage.
Yeah.
And to me, they're both solutions for the same problem where you don't want people, you're trying to remove that economic coercion. That's actually a good phrase.
It's probably not mine.
Okay. Fair enough.
It might be. I don't remember a specific source for this, but it's probably not mine.
Okay.
And if it is something I thought of here, somebody else has used it or come up with something better already. So
okay. But I guess what the difference in their approach is, one values just existing and being alive, and one values working.
Yeah.
Right? So minimum wage, in order to take advantage of it, you have to be working.
Yeah.
Whereas universal basic income, it's really just everybody who's alive is valued the same way. And a part of me feels like potentially you could have a combination of both. But what UBI does is it makes the idea of minimum wage, or the need to enforce a minimum wage, obsolete. Because if you have enough to survive, you don't feel coerced into doing a crappy job for not a lot of money, so somebody else can take advantage of you and make a lot of money off your back.
Yeah. I just think there's so many really sort of sticky facets of working under capitalism that are sort of baked in, right? And I know that there's problems inherent in any system, and in a lot of systems, in the actual execution of, you end up having a lot more problems, and it is easy and it to point to other systems, and it would be naive to say this one would fix all of them, right?
Right.
This one fixes it. We do this thing and then we're done. We're good now, right? That's very much like the we solved all the isms sort of mentality, where it's like there's a big step and then we're good and we can sort of, you know, dust our hands off and lean back. But I think definitely there are some what seem to me obvious issues with what we have right now.
Problems.
Yeah. With what we have right now, and whether we're looking at other solutions under capitalism or moving away from it, we need to do something.
I think unfettered capitalism is a problem.
Yeah.
I think authoritarian socialism is a problem too.
Yeah, I don't have issues with capitalism inherently. I think the same way that some people do.
Right.
Or at least I don't believe I do.
But there's definitely potential pitfalls in all of it, and I think taking advantage of some of each, the strength of each, makes 100% the most sense.
And I think sometimes the problem is it's easy to say, let's stop exchanging currency for goods and services, or, you know, whatever people are suggesting, right? And I think sometimes, for as great as other systems would seem in theory, you also do need to take a step back and look at where we can go from where we are.
Right.
There was something sort of really relevant that I learned in biology, in grade 11 biology. I had a really great bio teacher, thanks Mr. Sewell. And we talked about sort of evolution, like trying to reach peaks on mountaintops,
right?
Where basically the idea is, but it's easier to visualize it if you think of them as actually like valleys, where the lower you go, you can imagine that as being more sort of ecologically viable in whatever niche you're in. And so within subsequent generations, you naturally, if you imagine a species as like a ball, they're naturally going to try to roll around to anything around them that's lower, right? And that works really great for finding something that's good near you. But you could imagine you're in like a little divot somewhere, right? And then a little ways away, there is a massive sort of hill, right? And you could go down, you could find something that is way more viable for the space that you're in. Right. What's important is not how good something else is, right? Maybe humans exactly as we are with wings, with the ability to fly would be great, right? But if you look at the sort of little valley that we're in, and we look at where wings are, it's so far away and there's so much uneven terrain over there that you don't roll up the hills, right? You can't make that jump from one thing to another, right? Where if you're in a little rut and there's a big one next to you, you're going to need a lot of force and momentum to sort of get out of the one that you're in and move all the way over there, right? And just because it's better doesn't mean you're going to do it, right? You find the best thing that works for you in sort of your local space, where, you know, starting to mutate wings for us would be so bad for so long that nobody would ever get through the number of stages and generations required to actually get to that final place where you got them. And in a lot of ways, the sort of social order of our world is the same, right? Where you can point to somewhere else, right, and say, look at that. That looks pretty deep, right? That well looks pretty deep. I bet we could, you know, find a lot of answers at the bottom of there. But if you look at sort of all the landscape in between, you say, well, how much of this can we actually skip, right? Like when we're taking leaps and bounds, right? How far can we actually move in this direction? A lot of times we can't the same way with the system that we have, where it would be great to be able to try something totally new, but it's just not feasible in any sort of real practical way.
And I think that takes us to the end. We actually had some more content, or just more points to make.
We might save that for next week.
We might well, definitely we need a new thumbnail for this week, because that was actually part of the thumbnail originally, because I thought this would be a big talking point.
There we go.
Interesting. So,
well, anyways, here at the end, thanks for listening to our, I guess, very heavy liberal thing. I really want to bring back the question where they were like, I used to like them until they started spouting leftist talking points, because I feel like that would be particularly relevant to this video. But thanks for listening if you did, and a huge thank you to the people who are supporting us on Patreon.
So thank you to Console Peasant, supporting us at the highest tier, Last Word. Shawn, Farrell, Daniel Simonson, Aaron Mall, and Michael DeVries supporting us on the credited level. And Eddie G and Chris Wolf supporting us at the gratitude level.
Yep, so thanks so much for your support, and thanks so much for watching or listening. We'll see you next time. Komoda!